Welcome to the Education Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum Journal Club. Here in our PCRF Journal Club, we promote evidence-based practices by critically evaluating the latest science in emergency medical services. We hope our discussion will help advance EMS practice. Through the generous support of our sponsor, Limmer Education, we can make science more accessible and understandable. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the June 2026 Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum Education Research Journal Club. The PCRF promotes research literacy to advance the science of EMS educational research and clinical practice. And here with the PCRF Journal Club, we take a closer look at some of the latest research happening in medical education. Thank you to Limmer Education for sponsoring these podcasts so we can bring you the best of science in medical education. I'm Megan Corey. I am here with David Page, Michael Caduce, where Alex Tremblay may be joining us soon, and we have Dr. Bill Toon also. And today we will be discussing this article that is published in the journal Progress in Palliative Care, a journal I had not heard of until I read this article. This article is entitled Preparing for Death, Dying, and Bereavement Care, Student Paramedic Perspectives on a Novel Learning Module. So remember that you can find this and past journal clubs on our YouTube channel. So you can look us up at PCRF at UCLA, or just search PCRF Journal Clubs on YouTube, and you'll find both the clinical and the education research monthly recordings. So before we get into this, David Page, do you want to make any comments about the countdown here? We've only got a few days left. What day is it? It is the 26th.
Coming up on Tuesday. Coming up on Tuesday.
Very exciting.
We have a call for abstracts. It is exciting. So
tell us where you just came from.
Any research you have.
Where did you just come from too? You just got off a plane, you said.
I did. I was in the Big Apple, New York City. We ran a research workshop with the State of New York EMS office, sponsored by EMS for Children in this case. So we had some pediatric studies. Yeah. And it was amazing, exciting. The Borough of Manhattan Community College hosted us. We had participants, one participant from Peru. We had participants from California coming all the way to the Big Apple. So it was a diverse group. Of course, many New Yorkers, and Dr. Dorsett and Mike Tagman were there. They were mentors along with Jamil Sylvia and Susie Burnett, and just a great group. Dr. Ben Abo was there. So we had some great projects that will hopefully turn into abstracts that might make it to the International Scientific Symposium at EMS World Expo. We're on deadline, so Tuesday is the deadline. So get your stuff in. We are excited this year. Again, we're paired with an MSP and we'll publish in Pre-Hospital Emergency Care. The winner of Best Research gets a $500 cash prize, as well as an invitation to speak at overseas venue and an EMS or pre-hospital focused scientific assembly somewhere outside the United States, and up to $2,000 worth of grant money to help pay for their travel. And we assist and facilitate in that process so that winners can do that. And the winner of best, or the top winners of Best Research in Trauma, also get to present at the NAEMT World Trauma Symposium, also co-located this year in Orlando, I believe. That's where we'll be in October for EMS World. So we're excited about the partnership with NAEMT and how they support making sure our researchers, our trauma researchers, get a big audience to present. So do get on that. If you have some research, it's time to produce it. I will say, Megan, we have already one uh, uh, ESO workshop that's coming up this fall. So if you haven't been part of our workshops, please consider coming. It's in partnership with ESO Solutions, and it's on our website, prehospitalcare.org. You can sign up for it, and I'll tell you the deadline is coming up soon. The event date is in October 19th and through 21st, but you have to sign up by July 12th for that workshop. We will have, rumor is, another workshop with CareStar focused on equity in California, probably Northern California. So stay tuned for that. And
Great.
we love making sure that if you've never done research before, you can attend one of these events and come from idea to abstract in a matter of 48 to 72 hours. So make sure you're watching our website and tuning in so that you can participate.
That's right. And watch prehospitalcare.org for all these opportunities for the upcoming abstract deadline. And also maybe you have you have some research going on, graduate school, or you're an educator, or you're someone who has had some research going on and you're not quite sure what to do next, or you're interested and you'd like to know. Remember, they've got a list of associates on that PCRF website. You can contact us, and we have lots of people ready to mentor and help those who are looking to be researchers.
Love
Great.
it. And don't forget to catch our own Michael Caduce's column in EMS World, because it's paired with this journal club and the clinical journal club, so that you can really, and in fact, it's a great exercise for students, right, Megan? You can
Yeah.
have them first look at sort of an overview of the paper itself, and then both the podcast and the article in EMS World helps kind of put it into perspective from the either author's opinions or somebody who knows research, and then we can jump on and have a great discussion in class with the students.
That's a great thing. I'm glad you mentioned that, because Michael's on with us today. And when we go through this article, maybe we can wrap that in there about how, you do the clinical research journal club. What is it? The second Monday of the month with Dr. Remley Crow, Dr. Tony Fernandez, Michael Caduce is there, and he writes this article. Just how would you integrate? And if you're an educator out there and we're talking about this is a good article actually to talk about. How might we integrate something like this, or what are you doing currently, and how can you measure the effectiveness of what you're actually doing? So that's the other thing. You might actually be doing something that is innovative and novel, and you'd like to actually contribute to the discussion that we're going to have today here. So if you are an educator and you're thinking about, or you've been doing some research in this area, or teaching in this area, that you think about turning that into research, whether it's action research or traditional research, pop some ideas into the chat. And we've got several of us standing by to take those questions and comments and stories into this discussion, because this is an important one. So thanks for joining us today. We're going to begin. We want to remind you that you can go into the chat for other things, just articles, links, everything else, and type questions in. We can bring them into the conversation. Type your ideas in. So today's article is from researchers in New Zealand, which is one of the reasons why we don't have authors today. It touches on issues, though, that are very similar to here in the United States. So, number one, overall, we know that the cardiac arrest, even with the best of care, cardiac arrest survival is uncommon, and pronouncement or determination of death in the field typically occurs, in the field outside the hospital, which means that EMS providers are, as the article says, which is a quote that I really like, it says it right in their abstract, the last healthcare professionals to care for people in the moments before death, and the first to provide families with bereavement care. But the researchers note, and we kind of all know, if you're in education, that there is a big gap in how can we prepare students to become providers who can provide compassionate care and grief support and bereavement support. Oh, and Dr. Kim McKenna is joining us now too. I wasn't sure if you were going to be able to join us too, but this is just we got a full house, which is great. So this article then, talks about this gap, and then in education and what actually is reality. They use statistics from New Zealand saying about 80% or more, 85% of cardiac arrests are do not survive and are pronounced or determined in the field. Death is determined in the field, and they had cited prior research, which I didn't look up, but I'm wondering if Michael Caduce does, because he's very good at this. He reads an article and he goes right back to these connected articles. They talked about developing an education program based on prior published paramedic concerns. Did you see that, Michael?
No, but I highlighted it and I was like, what does that
Yes.
mean? Like, what did you go do?
Yeah,
No, but
there was a citation with it, and
oh,
I
was there?
thought, yeah, there was a citation where it
I've
said
got it up.
paramedic concerns, and
Let me dig around.
yeah, he can do this in like 10 seconds. So the young mind. But I thought that was really kind of great and interesting that they didn't just kind of say, well, we think. They based it on prior paramedic concerns, and they had a published citation there with it. So, which means that they've done that research on the concerns of paramedics, or they're citing some other research, maybe survey research on how paramedics feel in the field about pronouncement. And then they turn to develop a intervention. So the research actually questions or objectives here where they wanted to explore. So when they're exploring, that this lends itself to their methodology here that we'll talk about in a second, but they want to explore how student paramedics would respond to a novel module on the termination of resuscitation and on how they handle the situation after a patient's death. And then how learning about death, dying, and bereavement could be further strengthened within paramedic education. And they did this through there's two parts to this. The education intervention itself was a module that was embedded in an existing course in a paramedic curriculum. So it would be like if you had ACLS going on. It sounded very similar the way they described it, and embedded in the training in there was also, and all throughout, not just in the simulation portion, but in the didactic training as well, was this module, this novel interventions on death and dying and bereavement. So it consisted of 2 hours of didactic and group case studies, and that were focused again on providing bereavement care and on situations that they may encounter in post-resuscitation on scene. And the second session was small group simulations, and they had two. One was a sudden death, and the next was a dying patient, someone who had pending hospice, which I think is extremely common. How many times you've been to somebody who has had, where they've said, well, we're going to start hospice next week, and the person has terminal cancer or some other terminal disease. So those were the two simulations that they used a typical simulation environment with the classic mannequin and everything that would normally be in their education, except they added two actors, and the two actors would be family members. They did use, would act as family members. They did use simulation best practices according to there's editorial limitations, so they didn't get into the great detail, but they did cite that most of the time is spent on pre-briefing, and they used a structured debriefing method that is validated. So they used best practices in simulation. The only thing I would say about the education intervention, and we can talk in greater detail about this, is they did use people who were paramedics as the actors. And I'm really curious what it would be like if they had the actors that were not healthcare providers, if they used we don't tend to have a lot of standardized patient programs around EMS like they do in medicine sometimes. I'd love to see that change, but I'm wondering if that, affected the dynamic, or if they, even knew who they were or not. The research method was a mixed method study. So they had the educational intervention. Then the way they studied it was mixed methods. They had online survey and focus groups, and the participants kind of self-selected into online survey and focus groups. So they had two cohorts of paramedics they looked at, the 2024 and 2025. The qualitative data they looked at in the mixed methods study was the focus group data, the narratives that came out of the focus group. The transcripts were coded. And then open item on the survey, the free text item was also coded. And then on the quantitative portion was the Likert scale on the survey response. So looking at that was the kind of mixed methods portion of it. So I'm curious, did the panel, what did you think about the educational intervention, the way that it was structured? And again, that was the one thing that kind of stood out to me, was that they used a standardized, they called them Confederates. I think they're moving away from that term, but that's the people who are not acting as a patient, but they're acting as a bystander or family member. And that's, they used people who were paramedics already. They had a background and they felt that was a strength, but I was curious about that, about could you use, would it be better to use somebody who's not a paramedic to act and not known to them?
I don't know.
Make a
I
difference?
like it. I think
Mhm.
that paramedics are exposed to these situations often enough that they see different grief reactions. Um, I do worry about the homogeneity of the population of paramedics sometimes, and that
Yeah.
these are younger, usually participants. So it might be best to use, a volunteer who's a senior, who is maybe uh, uh, looking for some fun ways to volunteer in their community, and that experience in their own lives might be different. Maybe some of us decrepit old retired paramedics need to be the patients of the future. I don't know. Like time to retire and volunteer as patients in simulations. But
Why volunteer? Why can't they get paid?
oh
Hey,
well,
Bill Toon has
Bill
volunteered
piping
before.
up, but Bill is going to find a foundation that's going to help paramedic programs pay for standardized volunteer simulation role players. That's going to be the new foundation, the Bill Toon Simulation Foundation.
We have to
Uh,
stop doing EMS education on the cheap.
oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So let's fund education, and fund education to the degree that it needs to be. Because I know that you're big friends with, I don't know, Elon Musk, right? We just need 1 billion. It's not, it's like it's a drop in the button after bucket in 19 anyway. All right, I digress. But I think that uh it's I guess it's better than nothing. It's a bird in
Sure.
hand, but you are risking a homogeneous younger population of role players.
I think
Yeah.
that they did feel like that was a strength because the students found it challenging to have live actors. So that must not have been part of their normal paradigm.
Mhm.
And they found it challenging to speak to them in lay language in the way that they would understand. So their paramedic actors probably knew like how to say, well, what do you mean? I don't understand what you're saying.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, so
Hmm.
that part I think didn't sound like that was so much of a barrier. And I think there's lots of
Mhm.
us mature paramedics that could be used in that situation. But in the case of family members or whatever, it could be a younger family member too. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
I worry a little bit, to your point, Dave, about um, acting in when they mentioned culture in here, and they said they tried to. I couldn't quite picture it, and it made me a little bit nervous because we don't, if we're talking culture like ethnic group or something, you can fall into stereotyping. And so, if people are acting in a particular way and they're, you don't want to have people fall into assumptions and stereotyping either. So it
Yeah,
was,
and I just think that the paramedic population is fairly homogeneous.
mhm,
They're of a certain age group, they're of a certain they're healthy usually. Like if I imagine some of my death notifications, there were people who were older, disabled, or perhaps even on home oxygen, had other medical issues, had cognitive issues, developmental issues, just aside even from the own grieving reaction from their own family. But I mean, something is better than nothing. So I applaud them for A, doing research about it, two,
yes.
actually teaching people how and what, and giving them language to be able to discuss with each other the bereavement process and death notification. So I also applaud them for really contextualizing it. I do think, and Kim will have opinions about this, but this obsession that we have over simulation with plastic is detrimental, I think, to the emotional growth of paramedics students. If we keep doing simulation with a voice from God that's speaking to you from a speaker because they're looking at you through a one-way mirror, and you're staring at, a piece of plastic, you're not fully engaged with a person who's, staring at you in the face going, I'm affected. We were doing, Michael Caduce and I were just involved in the first ever course that we did on Breaking Bad News. That's a new NAEMT course. We did this at a conference in Indian Wells with CFET in California, and we had an event. We had we did a role play, and it was striking how experienced EMS providers who've been through this process already were affected by the concept of now I have to talk to you. I have to actually react to you. And even though they knew that I was one of the teachers, I'm simulating my reaction to this death, and they got tongue-tied. They were like, right, I need to find the right words. So it's fascinating when you do have the human touch, how that changes. And I applaud them for doing it. I want them to do more of it.
Mhm.
But I do think that we could be better about recruiting outside resources to do simulations.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think this is one where you really do have to have that interaction with humans to do it. Although some people would say you could probably practice this in AI. But I think one of the barriers always has been that in at least years ago, we never gave people sort of at least a structured
Yes.
to be able to convey death until, I really like the Cherry Hobgood's the grieving article, that grieving framework that I'll put that in the chat um, because it at least is a framework so you could have in your head like, okay, what do I need to do? Oh, I need to pause here. Hey, just give people time.
That's
Like
right.
I need to use the real words. I need to make sure I need to assess like kind of what people already know about the situation. But that said, as well as I do, that every case of a death is different. Every family
Hmm.
is different. Their background, their responses to death are different. So it doesn't matter what kind of a framework you have, you still have to be able to react as a human to human in that situation. So
But
that was,
paramedics understand that, right? EMS providers understand a framework because we use a framework to run and they make this point in here. We run a framework when we run a cardiac arrest. And what happens is after the cardiac arrest, they lose their framework and that's what, they start to feel like, okay, and we'll see this in the results that sort of awkward silence and what do I do now? And
Mhm.
to your point, there are several related frameworks that all have something in common. It's a classic thing. Somebody comes up with a different name for it, but and there's been articles in EMS EMS One and Life in the Fast Lane and others that bring that together, this framework that is evidence-based, that shows what patients and families have fed back, about how, what worked for them, how it can, I don't know in terms of the outcomes research, but impact the level of post trauma that they encounter with the EMS experience and how long that stays with them. All of that kind of there's some really good evidence there. So one of my things too is we should not be trying to make this up or do this without the existing frameworks that social work has really developed. And the other thing that kind of dawned on me in this is there's no mention of, and maybe it's in some of the citations, so I should look through the citations and the bibliography at the end, but the existing framework that social workers do, that's what they do. I mean, medical social workers in the emergency department, this is what they do. So even though we're in the field, and I get it, it's different, it's still, you're still using a framework that works, right? That has been shown to work. So, again, I think we have this idea that we stay in our own area. We look at our own, what do we do inside of EMS? We use our own actors, we use our own, and there's opportunity there where there's expertise. So I would say the other benefit of having somebody from outside is they truly don't know the words. So they don't know what you mean by, bagging the patient. When you say, I'm going to bag the patient, we mean ventilate. You say that on a scene and the family member says, thinks they're going to put them in a body bag. They can have real reactions to that. And maybe, a paramedic actor is so used to hearing that, that it's a normal situation. So, okay. So let's move on from the methods and just to show you the numbers. They said in the focus group, I think it was 2 cohorts. I didn't say the size of the cohorts, but it was integrated into the training. So all of them went through it. They ended up with 23 in the focus group, and they ended up with 51 validated or 51 surveys. This is a validated survey. There were 57 to begin with, and I think 6 were incomplete. So they ended up with 51. So decent size. I mean, to transcribe those hour and a half or hour long interviews, and they did it by hand. I don't know if anybody read that in the article, but when they said they did their own transcribing, I had to say, wow, purists still exist, because so many people are using AI and other tools.
Either that or they had a few PhD students who had to have a project.
Yeah. Yeah. So hand transcribing. Okay, so these were the 4 questions that were on the focus group. So the focus group were asked, and there were a couple of them that were sentence completion ones, like what has been the most useful in preparing me for patient death so far is or has been. And then they coded each one of these questions so that they could transcribe underneath each of the questions and pick up themes for that. There's multiple different ways of coding. If you've ever wanted to learn about qualitative research and the methodology and analysis, there's different types of coding and different ways too. So they used coding by question initially. The next one was, when it comes to patient death, what concerns me the most? So that was best preparation was the first, greatest concern. Then what did they think was the most important for the future? And then anything else we wanted to add. Always good to have an open one so you can figure out if there's things that you can't anticipate as a researcher. So a really, good protocol for their questions. I think there's a little error in this one. This is the demographics of the surveys. So this is the quantitative survey that was sent out, and the demographic breakdown. Notice the different terminology they use. School leavers as students that were under 26 years old, midlife and mature, and the majority are in that school leaver under 26. So 63% there. In the midlife, about 30% or so. Female, that's largely female, but they made a mistake in the percentage of the male, I believe, and 2 gender diverse. But majority female in the survey responded. And then ethnicity, it's really New Zealand European. Again, looks very much like we have in the US, except we see other and prefer not to say in the 18 and 6% of the population, 9 and 3 of them. And then the one thing I thought was interesting was the experience. And maybe I'm not as familiar with New Zealand, Australia, the breakdown of the normal demographics of what you see in these degree programs. Maybe Dave, you can comment on this, but I was really surprised at the mix here in the current and past health experience.
Yeah, I that did not surprise me. St. John's Ambulances, who would cover Auckland, they're a New Zealand-based organization. They're actually a worldwide organization, and in many spots, St. John's is a volunteer organization, and so there's a mix. But in New Zealand, you have a lot of full-time employment prior to going to paramedic school. Unlike Australia, where people go through the 3-year degree first, become a paramedic, and then get their first job working on an ambulance. So this did not surprise me for New Zealand.
Yeah, and what we're seeing for anybody who's not seeing a screen is no previous experience, about 37% of them, and then about split 25 and 22% full-time or other healthcare role, and then smaller percentage of them in the part-time emergency care. So all over the place. What other healthcare role is that? Hospital, or is
Yeah,
that
so it is really pretty common in Australia and New Zealand to have nurses who then go to paramedic school. It's considered, the toilets flush kind of the opposite direction over there. So it is an inversion of the concept of people leave EMS to go to nursing in the US. People leave nursing to go to EMS in Australia and New Zealand. It's considered a promotion. It pays better. And so you do see that quite a bit.
That's interesting because I would wonder what training they've already had. Yes, in
Yeah, the
bereavement and
first
grief
year,
support.
the first year of paramedic school is actually the same first year that all allied health care providers get. So, in fact, if you're converting nursing to paramedic, you most likely are going to skip the first year anyway, because it's really a lot of public health, a lot of just more the base that every allied health practitioner should have. And even as you go to medical school that first year. So it is very common curriculum just about health. So it does not, again, not very surprising here, very typical entrant into paramedic school
Yeah,
in New
great.
Zealand.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm just curious because that brings up a whole question about, here, what types of preparation have they had already in terms of talking to patients and families? And I mean, it's different when you're on a scene, of course, and depends upon the scene. But yeah, interesting to see if there was prior experience too in any of this. And they're, judging by what they say in the confidence ratings and in other things, there really wasn't any bereavement training at all.
And
So
I would
this,
say, wouldn't you say in the US we would have the same reaction from
definitely,
EMTs that went to, we assume, oh, we're going to train the advanced practitioners, so they're going to go to paramedic school, and now they've got some experience. Well, I think it's kind of putting the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, right? They've already jumped off of it and they've already went splat. And now we're going to take care of them versus putting the ambulance at the top of the cliff and preventing that from happening.
Yeah.
It's sort of EMTs are sent out into the world of patient care, and they're expected to get experience before they go to paramedic school. And by then, they've already walked into a scene and thought, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. And these comments that you see in the thematic analysis, which I loved, was,
Mhm.
no one really talks about death. That's a big
Yes.
theme, right? No one really talks about death. And so this discomfort we have about how we should address it, and the feeling of discomfort here the right thing to say, and it's
Mhm.
a quote, a very taboo topic.
Yeah.
I thought those were really good, juicy and qualitative analysis when you're quoting the participants. It really gives you a little bit of like insight into how they're viewing this. And the acknowledgement and quote, acknowledgement validation of death here. So the job of the paramedic is to save lives.
Mhm.
So like this is not part of the job of the paramedic. Like we are there to save the life, and if it doesn't go our way, then we
It's
don't know what
failure,
to
right?
do.
Then that's what they said in the discussion. I don't know, Kim, you're coming on to say something, but they said that, it can be seen as failure.
Well, right. Yeah. I put in the chat a book that I like just for ideas if you wanted to integrate some discussion about death and dying early in the program, which we used to do. And then
Is it being mortal? I can't see the chat.
no, it's called Kitchen Table Wisdom: Stories That
Mm,
Heal by Rachel Naomi Raymond, who was a pediatrician who had a lot of health issues and basically became a counselor for medical folks who were struggling with health issues, but also like dealing with death on the job. And so she has a lot of short little essays that you can assign out to students for reading. But and some of them you really sort of speak to, like, nobody talks about death, and what is the right thing to say? I feel so awkward. What if I say the wrong thing to somebody? And so it's just another resource that people can use. But the chart that you show, which has the smallest font of anything I've ever
yes.
read.
I did my best on the screen
If you
because I
look
can't
through
read it
that
in the
scale and think about the other thing was, they were like, this is the first time we've really talked about death. Um, that if you think about and you look through all of the things on there, you could think about at what point in the program could we design a simulation or a scenario that includes one of its objectives, talking about death. So when you're talking
Mhm.
about preparatory stuff and legal stuff, you can integrate conversations about death. And when you're talking about, resources in the community, hospice care, you should have a scenario that relates to hospice care, and especially some of
Mhm.
those little tricky things that come up with that. Anytime you're teaching cardiovascular and you're
Mhm.
teaching, a termination of resuscitation, part of that should be conveying the news of death, having somebody assigned to talk to the family. So I think that it's something that could be purposefully integrated. And I think we got better at it over time, but I think there's lots of opportunities to do that. I had an EMT student call me one night to drop out, and he said, well, I said, well, I'm sorry. Are you not happy with the program? He said, I just didn't know I was going to have to deal with death. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, oh gosh, darn. So
Well,
we had
yeah.
started including that in our admissions interviews.
Well, to this day, you still see, movies where they pick up somebody, oh, the person has died, and they put them in the ambulance driveway code 3, right? Still. So everyone thinks that everything is code 3. And certainly media hasn't helped it. I do think this chart, to your point too, Kim, was that's interesting, is supporting a distressed colleague. So this chart, I should explain, this is from all of the Likert scale data from a survey in one visual. It's just in the article, the font is super small, so that at least on the screen here, you can see what it says. But what you're looking at is kind of the measures of how many had strongly disagree versus somewhat agree and strongly agree. It gives you a good visual of where, first of all, the agrees and disagrees tend to hover, where you see fewer strongly disagrees, and then kind of that middle line. And I think it's interesting, and not surprising, that supporting a distressed colleague, managing my own emotional response, seems to be okay, until we get to, and then when we go down to notifying the family members, discussing things with the family members, guiding bereaved relatives, about practical issues. That's another one that could be very well guided, is how to guide someone. Uh, Terminating resuscitation efforts, though, that sort of surprised me, that had so few strongly agree, and still had some somewhat agree, and it's still, majority on the agree side slightly. But terminating resuscitation efforts, I don't know, that surprised me, because that's part of training. I thought it was
Dave,
just
is
making the
that,
decision.
yeah, Dave, is that maybe a cultural thing too in that country? Like that's not
Oh
really,
yeah, Dave,
yeah,
do you
because that
have?
was surprising.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm gonna not I don't know.
Yeah, because withholding, I mean, when you look at those bottom ones where there's very few strongly agrees, still a bunch of agrees, but still on that bottom line, it's withholding efforts and terminating resuscitation where that surprised me. Those two kind of surprised me, because those are both withholding and terminating are, decisions that you do make in the field. They actually have protocols usually that guide. You don't have a protocol that helps you guide bereaved relatives about practical issues, and you don't have one that supporting bereaved relatives with cultural needs. So I can understand that, but the other two usually have like when to withhold resuscitation as a protocol. So
I mean, I don't think it's that crazy to think that if you're entering a paramedic program
mm,
or in the middle of it, you're having trouble with the decision.
yeah.
When do you not start and when do you stop? I think that's just we just don't, it's taboo. We don't talk about it.
When I
Yeah.
thought that withholding, my mind went to pediatrics and how
uh
often the kid is very clearly deceased, yet we
Mhm.
still throw him in the back of the ambulance and drive in. There's still very strong perceptions that we're doing something for a family. I don't think that's probably the only reason that question answered the way, but that was where my mind went when I'm like, oh, I wonder if some of this goes back to sort of that stigma that like we're providing some level of therapeutic communication by transporting the pediatric patient to the hospital or not. I don't know.
And we told EMTs forever, you can't stop. You,
yeah.
you need a higher level provider to tell you to stop. And, the signs of incompatible life are essentially, decapitation. You can't decide, oh, this person's dead. But then the reality of the thing is you start working, and I remember walking into dead bodies and thinking, yeah, I mean, should I start CPR? And the cop was who I took my cue from. I mean, I would kind of look over and they'd be standing there going, "Don't touch anything." I'm like, oh, I think this is one of the ones where I just nod and walk away.
Yeah.
Because nobody told me, hey, this is really, how do you really interpret rigor versus or rigor versus that's a let's try.
hmm
I'm sure I
yeah.
tried a lot resuscitations that I probably shouldn't have because I just was afraid to make the wrong choice.
Yeah.
Has
Yeah,
that
and I
changed, Dave?
Has that changed? Probably not. Probably not.
So, what I've enjoyed all the conversation so far in this, but it brings a couple of things to my mind. One is a very old textbook, an old text, Helen Kubler-Ross's On Death and Dying, which I think is something that even that is a book that could be discussed throughout an entire program, whether it be EMR, EMT, whatever. And then, as you said, working on making it just part of taught throughout across the curriculum, death notifications, because I think it is can be a very emotional thing, and it's very different. When I stood in 1979 is when we had an actual protocol for termination of resuscitation, and it was unusual at that time, but we had one. And but it wasn't later in my career until I read Helen Kluber-Ross's book, and I wish I had done that at the beginning of my career.
And that's
And that
probably
brings
what
me
79 is about 25 to 250 years after you had actually started becoming a paramedic, right? I mean,
thank
horse-drawn
thank you.
carriage is, yeah.
Thank you.
Uh,
Tablets but
yeah.
the other piece I want to do is I think what we teach about death and dying and death notification should be the same no matter what the level of the provider is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that that's one of the things I see sometimes is when I look at
agreed.
the curriculums is that, you know, when we teach shock, the shock should be taught to the same terminology and level for EMR, EMT, advanced EMT, paramedic, and I always find it unusual that
Hmm.
when you actually read the textbooks, how it's interpreted differently and stuff. I just think there's some stuff we embed into our curriculums that are not helpful, and I wonder if it isn't time for us to do a real an overhaul.
You know,
Maybe it's time.
we first did, yeah, we first did a degree based program. We had the students go take out of the it was a sociology department that had a death and dying course, and it was interesting. The paramedic students revolted. They didn't want to go take a death and dying course from a sociologist. And it was a mixture of the people who had already been out there didn't really feel that the sociologist had a lot of experience with actually being in the moment, and the customs and rituals that came after, like funerals or remembrances or other things, they felt that they didn't really want to sit and have to wallow in it, to be honest. So it's an interesting. We thought it was like the perfect opportunity to have the right liberal arts credit, the right topic being discussed, and understanding the context and what comes before, what comes after in death. But the student population really did not feel the same way.
Mm.
So maybe an intervention here at the EMT level early, and the Kubler-Ross, like you were saying, Bill, is that maybe the learning about those stages early is no different than learning about the stages of anything else that we teach when we're teaching EMT.
And Being Mortal is the other one. That's Atul Gawande,
Mm,
and that's a
oh,
terrific book.
so strong, so
Very
strong.
strong. Yeah, about what.
If you
Yeah,
haven't
that
heard
and
the audiobook of that, that's
Mm,
impactful.
yeah.
but you can include on that, you touched on it earlier, Dave, is that, you know, we really should discuss in the curriculums. Well, when does rigor take place? Why does rigor take place? Really
Hmm.
people should understand what death is and all aspects of it. I just think that we take some things for granted that people may have been exposed to beforehand, and
Yeah.
I think again, there's some things that we just should be touching on throughout the entire curriculum, and they're followed in the clinical areas, and then they're followed in the field preceptor stuff when it deals particularly with a sensitive topic like this, because it really comes
Hmm.
down to talking to people, talking to
Yeah.
the patients, and
Well,
it's a great skill.
I'm going to follow that up with the talking is as important, but and silence. And so that's was in this paper. I love how they laid out, which is part of the model, the grieving model, and the Breaking Bad News course, is this uncomfortable silence.
Hmm.
And I'm quoting, your mind's racing a million miles an hour because you've got this checklist in your mind from a clinical perspective. And it's like, and I'm still quoting, okay, spiritually, let's just pause. Let's actually give the family space.
Yeah.
I could understand why you could feel like I can't just have a minute. So I think we don't practice silence. We, we need to practice silence. I mean, if you think of crew resource management and the tactical pauses that we want to include in patient handoffs and all sorts of ways in which we encourage the provider to have to do verbal diarrhea, and have to, be verbally engaged. And then if they're silent, we think they're not competent. Like, what's going on in that brain?
Yeah.
Silence is golden.
Yeah. So these are the themes, and that was one big one that Dave was just mentioning, which is so the themes. No one really talks about death. You'd mentioned, meaning that it's not little prior discussion of death, dying, and bereavement across their paramedic degree curriculum. So that's to everyone's point here, to integrate that at all levels is probably really important. Yeah, and like I think Dr. Toon said, at all levels of provider as well, not just throughout the entire curriculum. The other one, the uncomfortable silence, being, contributing to this need to act. I'm so used to doing that, to acting, and then having this. Talking to people who are distressed is a fundamental skill of paramedics. Another great line in this. There's a great discussion and great results section here. If you read any of this, you'll see all the quotes in here. Responding to grief, emotions and behaviors of family members. People are kind of afraid of that. What is that uncertainty? That was a common theme. And then the final one, the clinical learning opportunities. And I think this maybe, Dave, when you're talking about a sociologist coming in, that's a very academic thing. And so it might have been interpreted as this academician, like having a mathematician come in and do medical math, and they want some application right away. Whereas a social worker, a medical social worker who's actually applied and does this with families directly during that's a clinical opportunity we don't take advantage of always, and maybe some of you do. And if people have best models out there for accompanying social workers as they break bad news to family members, that can be powerful, and learning from somebody who is trained to do that in a controlled setting like the hospital can maybe help outside the hospital.
I see some smart people on this chat, so I'm looking to them to tell us what they do. I do think these clinical opportunities are what happened with the grief and the death and dying components of the course. It was clear that they did not want to spend too much time thinking about death. Maybe because you're young, maybe because you want to deny death is going to happen to all of us. But the concept of visiting a funeral home or visiting a burial site, and especially a burial site that wasn't of your own culture, was very disturbing to them in a way that they just felt that it was being thrust upon them, and that it was something that they would never have to do as an EMS provider. Now, I would beg to differ. I've had to stand in many varied cultural experiences at the deaths and death rituals and remembrance events for EMS providers. So regardless of what we did or didn't do for patients, or what customs there are to attend a patient's own ceremony or remembrance or event, it is our own events that actually have caused me to have a varied and persistent throughout the career contact in those spaces. So I don't think that's any different. And I think, as uncomfortable as that conversation is, I wish we didn't have line of duty death or death within the profession, whether it's line of duty or not. I think this understanding of the learning opportunity that there is when we experience those things in different cultures is incredibly important. I don't know. I mean, this one quote here that says, I feel like if I'm going, and I'm quoting, if I feel like I'm going to a resus, it doesn't make any difference to me what religion or culture they are, because I do it exactly the same. I don't know if that meets my equity lens. Like, I probably don't approach things in the same manner with a 90-year-old who's experiencing the death of their spouse as I would approach 18-year-old who just lost their child to a tragic crash. I don't know that I approach every single death notification in the same manner.
Mhm.
Maybe in the same framework, but
Yeah.
not the same manner.
Yeah, I was going to say just there's some element of like continuity in all of this, but like specialty situations like the death of a patient who dies by suicide, I
Mhm.
think people feel differently about that. I mean, it's almost like there's shame and nobody wants to talk about it and nobody. And so, I mean, those are also things to kind of explore in class. And I was just looking at William Schneiderman's comment about having a chaplaincy resident with an MSW who helped to facilitate the training. I think that's excellent. Yeah,
Yes.
that person would be such an amazing resource.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to see something like that. All these things that people have out there, and I'd love to see you share that through an article or something. So that's these are important practices. And again, that's what they say in this end, the end of that section on the theme precious clinical learning opportunities. Several focus group participants highlighted the desire to observe expert care of bereaved family. And to think that mentoring in the field with people who never were trained and have had to learn on the job, and who knows what they've learned on the job, that's that whole idea where we're saying, okay, we're going to work with this experienced paramedic and they can mentor me in the field because they've done this a million times, but they also didn't receive the training. The other thing is, Ryan Battenhorst was on with us recently talking about his research, and we got into the discussion of how many people come into this field already having experienced tragedy, and maybe that, that's part of it too. Are we actually reigniting some of that trauma, Michael?
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast, actually, Megan. That would be
Yes.
really interesting to do. I highlighted this. Several focus groups wanted the expert care, bereaved care, and it made me think, like, gosh, I wonder what our hospice colleagues would think if we came to them and said, we'd like to do a paramedic clinical rotation in
Yeah.
a hospice setting, right? There are plenty of care facilities that have everything from independent living to hospice care. What if we came and said, like, hey, just 8 hours of a shadow, we want, like, maybe you won't ever get to see that death notification in your shift, but at least you get to interact with the people who do it every day, and they can provide some insights, and they can also show you all the other things that hospice care provides. I think sometimes we just think of it as this, and you're like, I mean, they facilitate, a lot of life satisfaction items like chairs and mattresses and things like that that help support the patient through that dying process. So it made me think, gosh, I wonder if we should actually send them to go to a rotation and do a
Yeah.
rotation following a hospice person.
Yeah, with clear, outcomes and measures. I love the
Yeah.
idea of the medical social worker, the hospice, people who are, and this was actually coming out of these participants. They were talking about limited opportunities for those during clinical placements, and they also suggested that they could do repeat scenarios, acting in the role of the responding crew, or record video exemplars for reference. I mean, they came up with a number of ideas from this from which these education programs can be tried, measured, and shared. It would also be, this is a great subject that would be great to kind of get together and network at one of the educator conferences or educator groups, whether it's at NEMC or EMS World, with getting some groups of educators to get together and brainstorm and share what people have done. And again, another one of these sort of networks of research groups that could get together and evaluate it too. That would be pretty cool. So they said that what we probably could already think about too, or come up with, the conclusion of dedicated teaching using novel approaches is needed to prepare paramedic students for emotional and cultural complexities of end-of-life care. And as the population gets older, this becomes more and more important, but even without that, it's an important topic. So any final thoughts from anyone? I know we've had some folks in the chat. saying,
I'll
"Oh yes,
say,
apparently some programs do this."
I don't know that I saw this in the paper, and so I would just want to say it because I know Megan, Kim, Michael, we've seen this over and over. Bill taught me this. In simulation, we have the opportunity to actually cause vicarious trauma. And so
Yes.
the assumption that we want to, immerse people into this moment of death, we may replace the actual traumatic event with another traumatic event, which is the simulation itself. So I do think that there needs to be some thoughtfulness around
Hmm.
how to inoculate or prepare the learner for this kind of an event and scaffold the intensity of the event, so that there's some framework and some processing, and not just jump into, ouch. I know when we did this with Michael, we our first simulation was much gentler than our second and third kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's that people are getting some thumbs up from that, including Kim, who is going to come on and I think say the exact same thing. So um, anyway, we can continue this discussion in future podcasts because this is a really important topic. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks to those who participated in the chat. And if you have further ideas, go ahead and share them. And longitudinal evaluation, go out there and ask later how this helped them after they've applied it in the field. There's an idea. Then come back and present it with us on this podcast. So, but in the meantime, you can join us next month, July 24th. We will be back 10 a.m. Pacific, noon Central. We're going to start looking at AI and look at a comparative study of AI generated feedback versus human tutor feedback in medical education, bites versus brains. But there is a PCRF Clinical Journal Club before then. Monday, July 13th, you can join Dr. Emily Crow, Dr. Tony Fernandez, David Page, Michael Caduce, and a nice team as they talk about the next and best in clinical research. So to join us live, you can register at prehospitalcare.org. And archives are found on our YouTube channel. Go for it, www.youtube.com/@PCRF@UCLA, and subscribe, and you can catch everything. All right, thank you very much, and we'll see you next month. We hope you have enjoyed and learned from this PCRF Journal Club. Please share it with other interested EMS professionals. An archive of past journal clubs can be found at www.pcrfpodcasts.org. You can also find us on Facebook at PCRF at UCLA and on our website at www.prehospitalcare.org. A special thank you to our sponsor, Limmer Education, providing education tools for success at every stage of your EMS journey.